All right. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Mr. James. How are you, sir?
Doing well. How's everything going?
I am alive. I can't say that I'm sober, but this is what makes a good conversation.
I couldn't agree more.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself really quick?
Yeah, I'm James. Grew up just outside New York and now living in the city, practicing law here and there, trying to stay out of trouble, keep my parents proud.
Do you want to speak into the mic a little bit more just to make sure that we can hear you?
Yeah, you got it. How's that?
Thank you, sir. Oh, it's beautiful. So you are a lawyer.
That's right. I've been out of law school now 5 years.
How do you find that profession to be? Do you find it satisfactory? Do you regret it? Because I know that there's a lot of stigma out there, against lawyers.
I find it to be great, and not every day, but it's definitely something that I grew up knowing that I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go to law school since I was in middle school, and for me, law is a great field where you're challenged. You have to make judgments. You have to make arguments, and um, yeah, I'm not too sure what else I might do otherwise. Maybe a journalist, but yeah, I think it's great, and there's many different types of law and many different types of lawyers out there. I'm more in the realm of commercial litigation, involved in the last 5 years doing litigation over business contracts and that sort of thing.
You said that since middle school, you knew you wanted to be into law. Why?
Oh, actually, interesting question. I think I knew I wanted to go into something in the legal profession when it was seventh grade and they divided the class up between two sides. And this was always true with different issues. One issue I really remember had to do, it was, now just passed recently, Columbus Day. Was Columbus, the question was Columbus a hero or a villain? And they divided the class, randomly. One side of the class had to say he
That's
was
a
a
good
hero,
question.
and one side of the class had to say he was a villain. Just make those arguments, doing research, or and then I was on the side of being he was a hero, and just having to do research and trying to put together those arguments. I kind of knew at that point that I was interested in at least that area of life and the profession.
Do you remember what your arguments were
Um,
for
I
him being a
I
hero?
I mean vaguely, vaguely. Of course, the counter arguments that are very prevalent in society, like he brought colonization, racism, smallpox, all the rest. But I think my arguments were like, well, he did have a very difficult journey, and he did publicize his visit, and he did create the new world into something where people could go to bring commerce. At least those were the arguments. Yeah, so just vaguely, I do remember if I just having bullet pointed um, arguments and counter arguments, and I guess that's when I knew that I wanted to be at least in a profession where you had to think of an idea, find support for it, and then try to present it.
Did you win or did you lose?
I think we actually won. So like the 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 hero side, I think won, and then I remember we had the Columbus Day weekend break, and I think it was just by the number of good points any side made.
Gotcha. I'll tell you what, I was in my first or second year of community college where I had to make an argument for communism. And so I'm the type of person that talks out of my ass. And I went up there and I made one of the best arguments for communism ever, because I basically said, hey, you know what? The version of communism that everybody thinks of is incorrect. Do not think of Cuba. Do not think of Russia. Do not think of North Korea. That is a false sense of communism. Real communism is where the community comes together. Nobody is competing with anybody. We all come together and we build a type of structure where we make sure that our offspring are better than our own lives. And the opposition was just not prepared for that, because all they had was, well, Russia was bad and Cuba was bad.
Right.
And I was really actually upset that they never came back with anything. I was like, man, I prepared all of this and you guys came empty handed. This sucks. Um, no, but yeah, no. It's good to have that ability to kind of think outside of the box, get the facts, and kind of make your argument. So, with that being said, what is your mindset when you are hearing some of the hearings for the new justice that is getting appointed, ACB?
Oh, Amy Coney Barrett, and I've been following her for quite a while. I mean, she's definitely been rumored as someone to replace someone on the high court. She's been on short lists, and there's been profiles of her. So I definitely knew about her before she was nominated. Definitely an impressive background, rooted in academics. She'd only been a judge for 3 years, but primarily a professor at
Wait, she's only been a judge for 4 years?
3 years, I think, less than 3 years, but
Do you
not
think that that's a bad thing or a good thing?
well. I mean, it depends. Like, I mean, a lot of this is what people don't know. I mean, a lot of uh, judges can come from different backgrounds. Some can even be politicians, and I mean, just off the top of my head, like for example, Elena Kagan was never a judge. She was just an academic beforehand. She's on the Supreme Court now. Um, Others have very different backgrounds, like John Roberts, the Chief Justice. He was an appellate attorney. He had worked in government in the Solicitor General's office. The people that bring high level presentations to the Supreme Court, but had for the most part been a private appellate lawyer and was only a appellate judge for a short period of time. And there's no requirement that any justice of the Supreme Court be a judge beforehand or even be a lawyer. There's actually no requirement. Uh, and and
You're
that's generally
telling me that right now anybody could be appointed to the Supreme Court.
yes. I think that there's no actual age requirement or otherwise. Of course, it's such a important office, that being the highest of the federal judgeships, but there's no actual uh, standing requirements to get there.
That is interesting. Especially after RBG passed away, right? Because that seat by many liberals was seen as, I don't know, more than just a seat on the Supreme Court. It was a type of holy grail. And you're telling me that Trump could have literally appointed or wanted to appoint anybody?
Well, I mean, life isn't one of the really funny things is one of my first law professors was like, yeah, you could say, what about this, hypothetical that, but life isn't a game. Life isn't by chance because there's real motivations, real risks, real incentives involved. Yeah, Trump could technically nominate whoever he wanted. He never would, or any president never would, because the whole point is they want to make an impact. They want to move things in their direction. And if we even talk about notorious RBG Ruth Bader Ginsburg, like a lot of her prior background ACLU lawyer. She had made large impacts in academia, in equal rights if you put it in the point of view of women's rights. So she did a lot of litigation as far as making a standard where the law differentiates on the basis of gender, there needs to be an important governmental interest behind that. You can't just have um, a distinction on the basis in law on the basis of gender for just some arbitrary reason. She was very impactful in procedural law, and she had some time as a lower court. I think it was D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. So she was a judge for a time. But she had a whole extensive background where she worked as a nonprofit lawyer in some would say gender equality or women's rights.
Do you think that there should be some sort of criteria?
I don't know that there needs to be criteria. I think that when it's such a nebulous thing or so ill-defined when they say who is qualified to be on the Supreme Court. It's like who's qualified to be a senator or a congressman or a president. It's not so clear because people come from all different backgrounds. I think the most important thing is someone that has a background in uh, constitutional law, statutory interpretation, has a good grasp of how to interpret those areas of law, a good writer, because different from politicians, judges have to write their opinions and explain why they ruled in either the petitioner or the respondent's favor, and
Right.
someone that's fair. So and as far as actual credentials, like does this person have to have been a lower court judge or have had to have worked in government or worked in academia um, or been a nonprofit lawyer? It's hard to say. It
What about the fact that these are not people that are being elected, like a senator or a representative or even a president, right? These are not people who are elected. Rather, these are people that are being appointed for life.
Right. And that's an interesting question too. And a lot of people would wonder why you would want a judge appointed for life. And they can retire, they can leave the bench, but one of the reasons why they're appointed for life, or at least the rationales, is to insulate them from the political process, to insulate them
Right.
from protests. For example, like
Right.
one of the most uh, funny, like meaningless things are the protests in front of, like, say, the Supreme Court for or against, say, abortion or the death penalty or take any other hot button social issue. And look, the whole point of federal judgeships, especially the Supreme Court, is their salary is fixed, subject to increases over time for inflation, and they're appointed for life. So people can yell and scream and caricature them and criticize them, but the whole point is that a judge should not be swayed by public opinion. They should be influenced by their judicial philosophy. And this is now getting into the deeper level of the whole difference between judgeships, people that are judges, and politicians. Now, politicians are supposed to vote according to both their personal views as and very well who elected them. They're representing people, and they're sent to Congress or the White House um, or the State House or the mayor's mansion because not because they're objective, but because they're subjective. They have views, and they're trying to enact policies, and they have ideas on where law should go, or where policies should go, or how society should be different.
Well,
Um,
these officials that have been elected, whether it's state level or federal level, they are technically supposed to represent the people, correct?
that's the theory. Like that's the whole idea of democracy is we don't have like people that are just a king appointed for life that can just tell us how to do things. We're able through elections to change society. And remember, and we'll get deeper into this probably, but a law passed by Congress, uh, generally speaking, or a law passed by the state legislature is something a judge has to follow, except to the extent that it may contradict an issue or come in conflict with an issue of either the state or federal constitution.
Okay, so I'm just gonna give a wild example because I mean we can get balls deep into this. Wild example. Let's just say that Texas says we're gonna go back to the 3/5, you know, rule where black people only count for 3/5 of a person, and they pass their own laws, and all of the state representatives pass it, and everybody agrees. At that point, it's up to a judge to say, yes, this is allowed, or no, this is not allowed.
Well, I mean that's kind of a strange example, but I kind of get your point. So like, let's say uh, like black people were somehow uh, disenfranchised or said given less rights, like some city or some state had passed a law saying, no, you this group of people you're not allowed to do what everyone else can do. So then in order to get the courts involved, someone has to bring a lawsuit. So someone has
Right.
to sue in a court, saying, "No, you, um, city government or you state government, probably the state government, you can't actually say that black people can't do this. They're just like everyone else. It violates the provision of the Constitution, probably equal protection, saying that all classes of the people should be treated equally, or some other provision, and then that will make its way up to through the court system, and then eventually that's where the courts get involved, and where they say where the power of the courts really becomes determinative is the courts are the final decision maker on what the Constitution says. So where a legislature where the courts can trump a legislature is to say, hey, actually, there's something out here. This provision in the Constitution actually says you can't pass this law, and we're going to strike that down. And that's the power of the court system and what they call judicial review, the ability for courts to analyze a law that whether it be state or federal, and to be able to strike it down as contrary to the Constitution. So, and there's different types of laws, and uh, what many people may not understand is there are different types of laws, and they have different powers. For at the very like basic law is like administrative law, that's like maybe a parking ticket, or like um administrative law for like sanitation in a restaurant, like made by an agency. And then the next tier up, or kind of in that realm, is executive action that's maybe written by an executive, like a mayor or a governor, saying, "Hey, things have to go this way." And then next level up would be a law or a statute, rather, passed by a legislature that has more value or more power, that can um, trump administrative or executive action. After that, there's trees after that, and then at the highest level is the Constitution, and that's the foundation of everything. And those words in the constitutions of either a state or the federal constitution are not long, but those words have the greatest meaning. And it's the courts that say what those um, words mean and how they might trump either a state or federal policy.
So, question: the Constitution, is it a living document or not?
That's the great debate, um, both in the ACB hearings or any other hearing, is, and it's important for people to know what that means. So there's two sides of the interpretation, and they slant towards what you might think as the Democratic side or the Republican side. Now, we'll begin with the Republican side or the conservative side. Uh, they may see interpretation as what they call textualism or in variant originalism. And what they mean by that is we will interpret the words as they were written at the time they were written. So,
Right.
what does that really mean? So, take a great example. There's a provision of the Constitution that says, something like, we will all have no cruel and unusual punishment. Now, uh, uh, applying that to issue today, somewhat still contested issue of, say, the death penalty. So,
Forcing someone to watch Jersey Shore
I
for
mean,
24 hours straight,
I
right?
actually don't think that seasons one and season two Miami were cruel and unusual punishment, but the other seasons may have been different. I mean, season one was pretty good. That was not cruel and unusual punishment. That was what we live for. GTL,
But
ending line.
back to reality of that law or that constitutional wording.
Oh, okay. So yeah, um, going back to that. So what a textualist would say is, at the time that they wrote, this amendment, the death penalty was already there. It wasn't cruel at the time. It was not unusual in the colonist days or afterwards in the 1800s. So why should we say that cruel and unusual punishment forbids the death penalty today? On the contrary, when we say what is the Constitution as a living document, on the Democratic side, but particularly the liberal interpretation, is that the meaning of words can change, and this is the heart of it. Those on the liberal side would say, hey, we don't necessarily have to view, say, something like cruel and unusual punishment as it was written in whatever 17 in the 1700s. No, we can interpret it as we mean it today in our evolving understanding of words and decency and ethics. So, in seeing it today, like, in the Western world, many Western nations, especially in Europe and elsewhere, have banned the death penalty. So we could see that now, interpreting it now, here and now, that it is cruel and unusual punishment. And we shouldn't have the death penalty under the Constitution. So that's where the breakdown in how judges interpret the Constitution really see it. On one side, they want to see the Constitution as restrictive. Well, we want to only interpret it kind of fixed in that moment when it was written, or kind of backward looking. Whereas on the other side, they want to see it as, hey, it can actually evolve and we can see new meanings through these words.
So let me summarize this as best as I can, because this is my understanding of the biggest worry about ACB replacing RGB. And correct me if I'm wrong here, But Roe versus Wade, uh, 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 is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
I'm not the most sober right now, and I'm not the smartest person, but
I'm not the most sober, and I'm not the smartest either.
okay. So, from my understanding, is that the reason uh, people, and in this particular subject, women are allowed to get abortions is because men are allowed to do whatever they want with their body. And if women are to be treated equal, as the Constitution says, then women should be able to do whatever they want with their body. But what you're saying is that a conservative judge could come in and say, well, when that part of the Constitution was written, there was no such thing as Planned Parenthood, and there was no such thing as medically safe abortions. So obviously, the people who wrote this law never meant to allow women to get an abortion. In other words, men and women at that time and period were not equal. Thus, we have to strike down Roe v. Wade.
Um, I mean, this is a big issue, and it's probably the most, I guess, most concerning issue to many people. And it's important to understand,
This is the argument that everybody is freaking out over.
right? And well, it's important to start at like really the objective beginning on where we get from Roe and how it might change. So, under something called the 14th Amendment, it says,
So hold on, sorry. Before you say that, I've heard many people say that within a week or two, it will get struck down. Roe v. Wade will be destroyed. Is that possible?
that, in my view, is impossible.
Okay.
Not even
So
impossible in this year, because they. So, all right, do we want to talk about the? Uh, I mean, this is a huge subject, but do we want to talk about how that might be
what is
possible?
realistic for people who are on the liberal side who are worried that they will lose their right to get an abortion? What is reasonable in
Okay,
your
so
opinion?
we can talk about Roe generally. So before Roe versus Wade, the America was a checkerboard. So kind of similar in the sense of before Obergefell with gay marriage, some states had very restricted or maybe unrestricted abortions in the 1970s, and some states had very restrictive abortions or even no abortion. So each state decided through their state legislature whether or not they would either allow abortions, have restricted abortions, or have no abortions. And that's one of the really important things to convey. It was a state issue at that time. So it was the states that decided whether one could have an abortion or not. What was special about Roe versus Wade is it became a federal issue. It became a national issue where it was decided nationally across all 50 states. And what the Supreme Court did in Roe versus Wade, the outcome was some protections for abortion, but fundamentally, what they saw in the 14th Amendment, there's a provision that says no one should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. But within that, they call it substantive due process. They found, at least that court at that time, found a right to privacy. That is to say, the courts or the legislatures or the state governments should not be able to say like whether fundamentally you can have an abortion or not. And they said there is a fundamental right to an abortion up to a certain period. So in Roe versus Wade, one of the important things is they said in a certain period of time, a woman has the right to have an abortion. So it was like a 3 trimester sort of period where in the first trimester, no state could restrict um, abortion rights at all. You could freely, in all 50 states, have an abortion. In the second trimester, 3 to 6 months, a state could regulate it, like have some regulations on what an abortion might look like. Do they have to see the baby and like an ultrasound if they had it at that time, or do they have to have parental consent or something like that? Um, Actually, I'm not sure about parental consent, but like some sort of restrictions. Now, the third trimester, they could restrict abortion, or a state could restrict abortions. That law did change with a case called Planned Parenthood versus Casey, where it became like a thing about viability, where a state um, uh, couldn't regulate before viability, and that's where a fetus could live outside the body. And then after viability, they couldn't um, have a restriction that was an undue burden. So, to answer your question,
Very complicated with
all very complicated, but
yeah.
the whole point, I guess, is if Roe versus Wade were ever to be overturned by a new court, that doesn't necessarily mean that um, all abortion is gone in America. Um, it would mean it would become a state's issue. And more than that, in order for Roe versus Wade to go away or to be done with, someone has to bring that case. So what has to happen is probably some state has to say, you know, we don't follow Roe versus Wade anymore. We're criminalizing abortions in I don't know, like Alabama or Mississippi or some other notoriously conservative state, and then someone brings a lawsuit challenging that. That goes up to through the court system, and then ultimately to the Supreme Court, and then somehow in the Supreme Court one they say, hey, for some reasons, the underlying reasons in Roe versus Wade were wrong, and so we want to overturn it and make it a state issue.
So basically, they need to convince that basically women do not have the same rights as men, right? Because at the end of the day, a man has the right to do whatever he wants with his body, but to a woman, she's not allowed to do whatever she wants because she's capable of creating life.
No, I mean it all goes down like this once again with the court system and with judges. The policy debates aren't as distinct as the legal debates. The legal debates are really fundamentally on the liberal side, that there is a right to privacy and the government should not regulate these sort of very private, ultimately medical decisions. Versus, on the other hand, the conservatives would say, hey, you've read a right to privacy into the Constitution where there is none, where uh, uh, where you could do a word search in the Constitution.
There's nothing about privacy, right?
Whether you have a right to privacy, I guarantee you is not there. That at least
Right.
those words. And then more than that, yeah,
Isn't that also what Google and Facebook uses?
what do you mean by that?
I've read a lot of articles about how social media companies are taking advantage of the fact that you don't have a fundamental right to privacy. So they can take all the information that they can and do what they will with it. Because, again, where in the Constitution does it say that you have the right to privacy?
Oh yeah, no, no, and that's an important point, and we'll get there. But finishing the idea, conservatives would say there's nowhere you do a word search right to privacy, and more than that, there's nowhere that says a right to privacy means the right to have an abortion or unrestricted abortion. But going to the Google issue, that's also very interesting. the Constitution only protects public conduct or public sort of legislation or policy. It protects you against the government. So, when we talk about freedom of speech, does that mean that uh, you can necessarily say whatever you want whenever you want against someone else? Like bang on their door saying, you're a terrible person. Not exactly. The Constitution protects you against the government. It's rights against the government. So the government can never
Right.
say, um, you can't say that because that you're criticizing the government. You can't protest because you're saying, the White House is bad, Donald Trump is terrible, Nancy Pelosi is a liar. You can say those things against the government, and the Constitution protects you against government backlash. What the whole idea is of the Constitution is protecting you from governmental backlash, because the whole idea in the revolutionary days is if you spoke out against the government, then you were thrown in jail. Or if you printed pamphlets or newspapers with your name on it, you get in trouble criticizing the government. So they wanted people to be able to criticize the government, to say what they wanted, to have individual rights without over intervention by the government. Now, does that regulate private conduct? Does the Constitution necessarily regulate your individual's relationship to Google or Facebook? No. And their point of view is the things that the information you've given to Google through Gmail or in chats on Facebook Messenger, that's kind of theirs because you've been willing to use their product.
You volunteered to give them that information.
As a policy, they wouldn't just like publish it on the internet or whatever. Then they have no subscribers or no users the next day. But the whole idea is it's kind of a weird world as far as what privacy rights people have on the internet. And
So
yeah,
before we wrap up on Roe v. Wade, from what I'm understanding is a lot of it has to do with what is a private matter versus not a private matter. What I see it as is equal rights, right? But I mean, anybody can make that argument. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not smart. I can't go balls deep into that. But the other part that I wanted to clear up is, could Congress, by the power invested in them, create a law or a constitutional amendment that says abortion is a legal right and has to be deemed accessible in all 50 states? Could they do that?
uh, um, it's possible, but unlikely because another thing that yeah, I don't know that that's really possible, and it would be such a challenge because it brings up another issue, which is Congress it has only limited powers to create laws. So it can regulate laws related to national affairs, like related to interstate roads and and interstate commerce. So when it creates a law, it has to have like a multi-state effect or a national effect. They can't just say, "This is where federalism comes into play." Congress can't make a law that says, "Hey, James, or all people on the Upper East Side of Manhattan need to wear hats," for example. They can't write that law because it doesn't have an impact on interstate commerce. It doesn't have an impact nationally.
Wouldn't abortion be a national issue though? So instead of saying if you live in Texas, you got to travel to Kansas to get an abortion, um, you have the right to do it in your own home state.
Well, there's certain. This is also getting into a technical issue that's not really 100% well vetted, but one of the things is, does a for example, someone getting an abortion have a impact or a substantial impact on interstate commerce? Does it affect um, you know, multi-states, or is there really goods or services traveling between states to facilitate an abortion? I'd be kind of skeptical. So
Is that question that you just asked more of a yes or no, or is that can you show me enough numbers?
it would always like one could always challenge, hey, this doesn't have a substantial impact on interstate commerce, this law that you passed allowing national abortions, and they would challenge that. Yeah, and that would go through the court system to say, hey, maybe Congress uh, passed this statute and it really doesn't have an impact on interstate commerce, or at least these acts. But in answer to your question, could there be a statute that does it? I would be skeptical they could pass that statute, but whether it's within Congress's power to pass, I'm skeptical. Could, however, there be an amendment that says, "Hey, there is uh, a right to an abortion, and it passes both houses of Congress and three-fourths of the state
Of the
legislature
states?
comes a
Yeah.
new amendment, and then everyone has to follow that." Yes, 100%. There could be an
Okay.
amendment that says, yes, everyone, every state, everyone in the United States of America, the newest amendment has a right to an abortion. If that passes the amendment process, then yes, that would be the law of the land.
Okay. So that's probably where I get confused a lot because I guess I'm looking at laws and amendments as almost equal, but they're not, is what you just told me.
Right, exactly that. Because, like I said, there law is, everyone says law, 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 but there's different types of law that have different powers. For example, like I said, at the lowest level, you have administrative law or executive action. Those could be
Right.
reversed by by a new administration. You just need a new mayor or a new president. They could just change the administrative action. The next level up is you have a statute passed by the legislature, um, but that's subject to the the Constitution. If the Congress or a state legislature cannot pass a law that contradicts the Constitution as interpreted or as presented by the courts. But if there's a constitutional amendment, on the other hand, that's something the courts have to follow, and every other state legislature and Congress has to follow unless there's a new amendment. A great example is slavery, for example. We all know that from the inception of America up until the post Civil War, there was slavery. There were some states where it was illegal to have slaves, and some states where it was permissible to have slaves. And then after the Civil War, the North, as we all know, won, and as conditions for reunification, they passed the 13th Amendment, which said um, no slavery or involuntary servitude unless, as punishment of a crime in the United States. So that meant that every state is not allowed to have slaves. They can't pass a state law that says it. A state court can't say, hey, uh, this thing is, this is a violation of our state's rights. No, it became a constitutional amendment, the most powerful law out there. And no state and no congressional law could allow slavery after that point.
So let me ask you this then. If you need, what is it, three-quarters of the states to ratify an amendment, um, how did they get the 13th Amendment passed? Because I'm pretty sure half of the states still wanted slavery, right?
I don't actually know the actual background, but I mean, I think that it passed the in both houses of Congress, passed all the northern states as well, and then it passed uh the border states in the south that were aligned with the north, but were supportive of slavery, and then other states joined on afterwards when they realized that um, it, it was probably necessary to rejoin the union at that point.
Let's fast forward to today. Um, this country, from what I can see, is as divided and split as ever before. How in the world is a democracy supposed to function correctly and efficiently if everybody hates each other?
I mean,
And in addition to that, everybody is leaning on the courts, right? So instead of passing an amendment that says women have equal rights, or passing an amendment that says human beings, as long as they're innocent of any crime, can, live a peaceful life here in the United States and not get deported. Without those type of laws, we're leaning on courts. And the problem of leaning on courts is all of a sudden courts become politicized. How are we supposed to move forward in an environment like this, or can we move forward in an environment like this?
uh, I I don't know, and I think it's an important question that doesn't really necessarily have an easy answer um because right now I think what the polarization is, there isn't that much incentive for a middle ground where each side really wants its way, um, and each side is not really willing to compromise. So it's and they're just waiting for the moment where they have the executive branch and the legislature, and they can ram through their policies. So it's not really clear um, how things go from there and what is the middle ground and where it is to compromise. Because I honestly, right now, the uh, word compromise is not a good word. Anyone that compromises is it's a bad
It's a sign of weakness.
right. So where we go from here is not exactly clear, and I think that what what while people do want a better maybe public life, maybe in a kind of ideal, in the nation is just kind of polarized, and in some ways that's really what they want.
Do you have any sort of advice for the average American who just wants to see their country do better? And I know that that's a lot of pressure or a loaded question for you for not even being in public service, but you know the law a lot better than most people. You know how things work a lot better than people. What advice do you have for them, or what words of wisdom do you have to share with them?
I think that where it starts, I think, is just a deeper understanding of the other side. And I think that one of the things that has been highlighted by many is like people are rooted in their own camps, and they look for validation of their views either on social media or on cable news or elsewhere. So they only look for things that kind of reinforce their view, and they don't really look for views that kind of maybe challenge or present the other side of an issue. And the more that you see or read uh, another point of view, one might find that it's not really black and white, and things are more gray. So I would actually encourage people to not just read what you would be interested in or what you agree with, but also read things that you don't agree with, that make you go crazy, or are opinions that you don't support. And I think that one of the things that might bridge the gap is that people read alternative points of view. And people right now, people talk about alternative facts or fake news, or uh, or things that are from their point of view make no sense. And everyone has their own facts, but what are really facts? Facts are things that are supported by support. Kind of like, what's so special about Google? Google is special because it returns search terms in order of citation. So, like, the thing that's highest is the website that's most cited for that search term. So, what are facts? Things are supported more and more by other things. So the more that you can read different points of view and find where things link and are supported by other points of view, are where you can really find solid facts, and not just merely facts that maybe support your point of view. And just trying to see whether you can maybe see an alternative point of view. And I think the more that people are open minded, the more uh, that the community or society can kind of bridge the gap of polarization.
Here, here, I completely agree. Everybody needs to open up their ears, their eyes, and close their mouths and their fingers. Too many people go on social media and try to appear to know the right side or the good side or whatever it may be, right? Whether it's pro abortion, anti abortion, whatever it may be. It's like, hey, shut up. You got to understand where the other side is coming from. I completely agree with that. Um, and actually had a good conversation with Tamika Williams, a good friend of mine from middle school who lives in Georgia, and she was telling me the exact same thing. Where she, as liberal as she is, and as much as she supports Democrats, she also believes that there should be an opposing side to keep the other side in check, right? Whether it's the Democrats keeping the Republicans in check or the Republicans keeping the Democrats in check, there's got to be some sort of equalizer so we can all come out on top. Um, you, Mr. James, where do you think this country will be in 5, 10, 15 years? Do you think we can survive the increasing divisiveness that social media has been giving us and the amount of pressure that has been created into the courts, right? So instead of Congress passing laws, now we're just pushing everything off to the courts. Can this survive much longer?
I mean, I definitely think that things are not as bad as they appear, and fundamentally, the American um, economy is strong. The political system has a lot of dysfunction where the two sides can't really communicate and pass meaningful legislation. But I don't know that this is really worse than a lot of other periods of society, times in American history, where, for example, people would definitely cite uh, the Civil War, where people couldn't get along with each other enough, where they said, no, we'll separate into total different countries. You do your own thing, we'll do ours. And that's where things went. I, I mean, this is definitely a time of difficulty and disappointment that um, people can't meet at the center, but a lot of incentives aren't there. There may be something in the future that brings people together. Some sort of I guess it hasn't been COVID in this realm, but some sort of national issue or some sort of national emergency that does bring people together. But in our current state, no, it's very difficult to see where things go in the next 5 years. And I think that, um, especially in the Obama administration and in the Trump administration, it's just been the kind of a growing echo chamber where certain segments of society don't feel like they've been heard, and so people are starting to act out and be very vocal in that way. Um, you can see that in the working class people that support Trump. You can see that recently in maybe the people that have lesser opportunities that are showing up for Black Lives Matter protests.
Before I let you go, I have one last question, and I think that everything you just said is, for the most part, very accurate. I think in the last 10, 20 years, including the Obama administration, obviously, a lot of the lower income population has been left out, and I think that this is partially of why we've gotten to this point. But we'll talk about this another time. But I do want to ask you one other question before you go, and that question is: you just mentioned that it would take something greater to kind of bring this country together to kind of be on the same page. Would you say that aliens coming down on this planet would be that thing?
Um, that's a good question. It could be if there was like a unifying thing, and that was like they were a threat, and like people had to come together to like fight the aliens and support the effort against the aliens. It could be, at least for that period of time. I mean, it depends. Like, is this an alien invasion or merely the appearance of aliens? I thought the question was like an alien invasion, like they come down with like pods and like we're like, holy shit, there's aliens everywhere. We gotta fight them.
Well, we talked about this earlier, right? Is what level of alien exposure would it take to get humanity to actually get their shit together?
I don't think, in going back to my former point, I don't think that the mere appearance of aliens, even here in New York, would make society fall apart. Like if there was
They
like
just don't give a
flying
shit.
saucer that just appeared, I don't. That would be troubling, but I don't know that people would just like society would, as we know it, would just fall apart. Um, and then it would be how much of a threat do we see the appearance of aliens being? Now that's different from like aliens appearing and they land in like little pods with their blaster guns and we have to like fight them off. I guess with like I don't know broken bottles and we don't really have guns around here. So with our
Yeah, but wouldn't that be a problem though? If they only landed in Russia and they started killing Russians, would the Americans be like, "Oh, well, it's only Russia, right?" Isn't that the human flaw of
I don't know that that's the case because I think nations would band together. And I would even say that that was true even in our common experience. For example, uh, well, we're getting off topic from aliens, but like take the war against ISIS. Um, we were actively involved in bombing ISIS. We had special forces, troops on the ground. You know, other Western nations, the EU were there as well.
what about the wars in South America where you have one country invading another country, raping and crucifying, innocent people?
Well,
I don't think we ever got involved in that, right?
it's up to whether it was a threat. So, ISIS was maybe a kind of existential threat to us, but it was a real threat to, say, Russia. So they were bombing ISIS too, to the point
So as
where
long as the aliens come down and kill Russians and declare peace with the United States, we're good.
I don't know how much the peace proffer would go, but I would be skeptical. I would
Man,
be.
I'm telling you, human beings are weird, human beings are inconsistent, and human beings are as unique as they come. That's for sure.
That's right.
Um, no, and I this is why I wanted to have you on, and I really, 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 really thank you for coming on. Uh, your insights in law and clearing up some of the Roe v. Wade and what is actually possible, what isn't possible, and some of the history lessons behind the laws and the system here in the United States. I mean, so many people are not aware of it, and I honestly want to say thank you for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
And I will make sure to have you on shortly after the election and everything else, so you can tell me that aliens, whether they attack Russia or us, uh, let's see what happens, right?
Yeah, we'll see about that.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience and explaining the truth about things.
All right, thank you.
I will talk to you later, sir.
All right, sure thing.
Good night, everyone.